As the Wizard of Oz taught us, there are good witches and there are bad witches. But no matter what kind of magic a witch may practice, stumbling across one in the woods would terrify just about anyone. Welcome back everyone, thanks for tuning in to another video. My name is Kennedy and today we are going to be counting down the top 10 terrifying real witches people encountered in the woods. Starting us off at number 10 is a classic witch. First up we have a story from Louis 92, and they start off by explaining that their grandfather used to be a rancher in Mexico, and that this was a story he used to tell often when they were young. Quote, one day he said he was patrolling this ranch late at night and he heard a baby crying. Now the land is pretty flat, so he looked all ways and saw nothing. Maybe some goats out in the far distance, since they sound like crying babies. As he's walking his route, he hears the same sound, looks up in the sky, and he swears he saw a witch with black clothing and everything flying towards a mountain. He panicked, ran to his car, and drove off as fast as he could. I mean, no kidding. If I saw a witch riding a broom in the sky while I was alone at night, I would definitely be freaked out too. Moving on to number 9, a coven. Next up is a story posted to Reddit about 9 years ago from Astrius94, and it would definitely freak me out to say the least. Quote, about 5 years ago, me and my friends were just messing around in a smallish local forest. Basically, we saw in the distance, in a little forest clearing, a group of 4, 5, 6-ish people, what looked like to be wearing black hooded robes, sitting together on the ground quietly. I know it seems typical, but there was no normal reason for anyone to be dressed like that in the middle of a forest. We just all freaked out and ran after watching for about 20 seconds. I still remember the image of them sitting there vividly all these years later. Coming in at number 8, a psychic witch. This next one comes from Reddit user Bubblegum Scent, and they begin by explaining she knew a woman who lived in the middle of nowhere, really far from town. She went to her one day with her mom. Quote, this woman was eerie, that energy that also scares you because you think she can see through you, but there was nothing wrong with her face or hair or anything. She was average looking, except for her gold grills all around her mouth. She first did a ritual with water and green leaves from a mango tree on us, chanting some stuff we didn't understand and passing these leaves in the fire. She said she needed to clean us of energy from the outside. Reddit friend explains that she's a very private person, so she hadn't shared any details with the woman when she arrived, but when this witch opened her cards, Reddit friend freaked out. Quote, this woman opened her cards and she saw and pointed out skin color, height, eye color, and profession of every single love interest in my life at the time, and which ones were in love and others which were badly intentioned. I was spooked the whole time. This woman knew about travels and work prospects and everything. It was scary. Coming in at number 7, Manchac Swamp. During the 1860s, Julia Brown was a well-respected healer and midwife who resided in a small village called Frenye. At first, she loved caring for her village, but after some time she started to feel disrespected by her community, feeling as though they were taking her gifts for granted. Julia began scaring the village, telling them dooming predictions about their impending deaths, and the townspeople, unsure if she was placing a curse or foretelling their future, became very troubled. Shortly before her own death, she said, one day I'm gonna die and I'm gonna take you all with me. And just days after she was buried, 3 entire villages were destroyed by a hurricane and hundreds of lives were lost. To this day, many believe the spirit of Julia Brown haunts the swamp, and visitors who have visited report hearing blood-curdling screams and the sound of her voice singing cryptic and frightening songs, terrifying all those who walk by. Coming in at number 6, Alice's grave. Alice died in the 19th century, and although she led a fairly normal life while alive, her death and afterlife were anything but. She was laid to rest in an above-ground grave, but soon after, many of the townspeople began to question, was Alice a witch? It said in the middle of the night, the large slab of marble covering her grave was removed on 3 separate occasions, and each time her remains were left outside of her grave. No one stepped forward admitting to have moved Alice Alice or the Slab, which led the people to believe that Alice was a witch trying to escape her grave and haunt the town. Eventually, large, heavy iron bars were placed over the grave in an attempt to hold her spirit inside, but this hasn't seemed to stop her, as locals claim you can still see her wandering the wooded cemetery at night. But just exactly what is she looking for? That is one of the many unanswered questions that leave visitors terrified, unsure if she comes in peace or if she is out for revenge. Moving on to number 5. Bell Witch Cave. One of the most well-known haunted locations, the tales of it being haunted by an evil entity go back as far as the early 1800s and have been very well documented throughout the years. As the story goes, sometime in the late 16th century, there was a huge feud between two neighbors, John Bell and Kate Batts. Now, Kate believed that John had cheated her somehow on a land deal, and so to seek revenge would routinely harm his daughter. This of course made John act out, and the two spent most of their lives trying to get back at one another. In fact, she was so hell-bent on revenge that the feud even lasted until her very dying breath. On her deathbed, Kate, who was believed by all in the town to be a witch, allegedly cursed the entire Bell family and promised she would haunt them for the rest of eternity. Ever since that day, a terrifying entity is said to haunt the cave. Even Andrew Jackson, former president who spent a night there, once famously said, "I would rather face the entire British Army than to spend another night with the Bell Witch." Coming in at number 4, a Satanic Idol. In 1991, a hunter was walking through the woods on the lookout for deer when he began to feel an overwhelming sense of paranoia. At that very moment, he turned around to see this creepy doll leaned up against a tree staring at him, and he could have sworn that it appeared out of nowhere. Immediately, the hunter knew he should not be here, and so he began walking as quickly as he could to find a way out of the forest. Then, suddenly, an old man dressed in black robes appeared beside him. He looked like a priest, the hunter thought, but something wasn't quite right. Every step he took, the priest matched him, but eventually he decided to ask the priest how to get out of the forest. Creepily, the priest did not speak, instead just pointed off into another direction, turned around, and left the man alone. Now, luckily, the hunter escaped, and the following day, after telling his friends the strange events, they suggested that he reach out to Ed and Lorraine Warren. Upon telling them his story, they explained that the priest was actually a well-known member of a satanic cult, and that the creepy doll he encountered was actually an idol used for ritual purposes. Then the Warrens, being who they were, ventured back into the forest, found the doll, and brought it back home. Soon after, however, strange things began happening. Allegedly, one time Ed was speaking with Lorraine, turned away for a second, looked back, and she was suddenly 30 feet away and passed out on the ground. He called the ambulance, and she spent the next 3 days in hospital, in and out of consciousness, and according to Ed, she actually levitated. Moving on to number 3. Bear Walker. Next up is a story from a now deleted Reddit account about the time they came into contact with a bear walker, which in indigenous cultures is depicted as an evil sorcerer who uses sacred medicines for evil. According to our friend here, quote, "I was 20 years old and very healthy. One night I had a dream I was in a field and was picking wildflowers. From each direction a tornado was coming at me. I woke up in a fevered sweat. That began 2 months of sheer misery. My doctor kept saying that I had a UTI, she would give me antibiotics, and it would subside for a while. I lost 40 pounds in the span of 2 months. By the end of it, I couldn't walk and barely ate." Reddit user says her family grew concerned and convinced her to go to a hospital, and after an ultrasound, they found a huge growth on her ovary. The user continues, quote, "A few days later, I had surgery, and when the doctor came to visit me, he said he had never seen anything like it. It was a yellow, almost concrete-like substance around my ovary. I got better, but my mother remained unconvinced and scheduled an appointment with a medicine man. According to Reddit user, the medicine man said a woman saw her at a powwow, became interested in who she was because of her mother, and must have thrown a piece of medicine in the path which she stepped on. Quote, he asked me if I still felt it. I said yes. He took a bone, what kind kind, I'm not sure, placed it in the area and began to suck. He started vomiting yellow. He gave me medicines and rituals for my mom to do. I went home that night and slept for 13 hours. My sickness never returned. Coming in at number 2, Lechuza. Our next story comes from Reddit user Zerora, and for reference, a Lechuza is a witch that transforms into an owl. Quote, I was out at a friend's ranch with my buddy, a cousin of mine, a mutual friend, and my buddy's dad. We were putting up some fence posts and barbed wire so we could corral some stray cattle and keep them there until we found the owner. The sun was setting, so we decided to call it a day. We built a bonfire close by and huddled up in an unfinished ranch hand's house. We were drinking and just shooting the breeze and telling stories from high school. Eventually, we got to stories about the paranormal. Once I got to describing the Lechuza, we heard an ungodly screech, almost ear-piercing. We all turned to look in the direction of the screech, and before my eyes can adjust to the darkness, I hear my buddy scream, "Es una Lechuza!" and he hauls ass to the main ranch house a few hundred yards away. I turn back towards the darkness and I see a giant silhouette of an owl perched on one of the posts we had driven in earlier that day. It was massive. Scared shitless, I decided to run back to the ranch. I finally reach the ranch house and my buddy's dad demands to know what is going on. Reddit friend tried to calm him down, but eventually decided he would go to check out if the witch was still there. But when he arrived back at the tree it was perched on, the only thing left were giant claw marks. And last up in our number 1 spot, On the Trail. Last up is a story from a now deleted Reddit account, but our Reddit friend begins by saying that they used to live in a really small town as a kid and that they would often play on the trails near the forest after school with their friends. Quote, one day we were walking a trail and a lady in her mid-50s or 60s came out of the woods. She had dirt all over her hands and pants. She said her car broke down and she needed help. We said we would go tell our parents to come help, but she insisted we come into the woods. We said no and kept walking, and she just stared at us. It was like she just shut off as a person when we told her. The smile went away. Even when we were a couple kilometers down the road, we could see her staring at us. Anyways, we get back to my friends and we're playing tag or something in his backyard, and one of us starts making fun of the lady we saw earlier, and out of nowhere he is launched into his parents' shed, breaks the window and his arm. We all stand in shock. His parents come out and start yelling at us, blaming us and saying we threw him. To this day, we all seem to have the same recurring dream or seeing the woman in the woods, except every time I dream it, she is closer and closer to us. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you liked this video, and let me know down below if you have ever encountered a witch. I'll see you next time.